Hello and welcome to our fifth episode of the Stories of Awakening. We're here today with a very special guest, someone who I hold very, very dear to my heart. Her name is Beth Lorio, and she's been a friend of mine for about a decade. I really enjoy my conversations with Beth, so I'm super excited to record this for y'all and give you an insight into both our friendship and into a wonderful healer and artist's life. So Beth identifies currently as an interdisciplinary, I almost got it out, an interdisciplinary artist, which means she is an artist that uses many different medias to express herself. Currently, she's using a lot of visual media and visual art that you can see on her Instagram. So she'll share that with you. And it just brightens my day. She posts almost every day, sometimes more than once a day. And I just love, love, love seeing her artwork as it evolves. So we're going to talk a little bit about the relationship to art and inspiration in a little bit. But first, I'm going to hand it over to Beth. And the first question I have for Beth is to share with us one of her origin stories and how that story was sort of a jumping off point for her early formation of identity. All right, Beth, welcome to Stories of Awakening.
Why, thank you, Riza. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone out there. One thing, I don't know, I guess maybe the most important origin story that should just be spoken to a little bit is Riza and my origin story, which is that we used to sit in a coffee shop in our neighborhood for hours on end with cups of tea and bagel sandwiches and just jabber for like literally 3 hours at a time. And always it was a fairly goofy experience. Always fun, always deep, always very informative and super goofy. So welcome to our world.
Yes, welcome.
Yeah. Gosh, well, you know, as far as origin story is concerned, this particular origin story, if you will, has gone through many permutations over the years, but it has been with me since the beginning, which is that before I was even born, my parents dated in high school, and they were graduating from high school, and my father was set to go into the psychology department at the local university. And I guess they were talking one day, and he was sort of wistfully moaning about how he really wanted to try art. Like he just sort of wanted to try it, but blah, 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 blah. You know, I don't know what the but was at the end of that statement. So apparently the following Christmas, my mother gave him a paint set, and it was like, all right, dude, here it is. Like, pick up the paintbrush, put up or shut up. So he did, and it was not very long before he changed his major from psychology to art. And he's a functional potter and has been for many, 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 many years. So I was the firstborn into a family where art and making art and creative expression were sort of like the big revelation, right? And I know that I, you know, from a karmic level, agreed to come in first to this family because I have a very, very strong agreement with both of my parents that my creative life is legitimate, desired, super important, and valued. And coming in as a soul with a very, very, very strong drive to create, that was what I was looking for. I was not prepared to come into a family where I was going to have to fight to make that to be validated for being a creative person. So yeah, so that whole sort of artist identity has been a part of me since before I even came in this lifetime. Super, super strong. Now, you know, there's been all kinds of around that over the years, but yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
My brain goes in so many different places as you're talking, which is typical for us. I'm like, oh, the whole world is opening up. Identity is such a strong thing, isn't it? It's so interesting. The idea that your identity was formed before you even came into this life is such a remarkable thing. One of the things that I was thinking of was, my husband said to me at one point, I was never given the space to have an identity. I never got to choose my identity because I just wasn't given that space. And to think that, you know, but identity is so important. It is something that we have to give ourselves permission and have permission to form, right, in a lifetime. And I do want to touch on psychic horizons, which we didn't touch on. To be totally honest with everybody, this is the second time we've recorded this session, this conversation, because the first time we had so many bizarre technological snafooages that it was not fit for like public consumption. The recording just was not smooth. So we've decided to re-record this, and we're going to let the conversation organically form as it will. But we got to watch the old video, and I got to pick out certain things that were still question marks that I didn't get to ask, and also pick out certain things that I thought were really important. So we'll see if we return to those. Anyway, I do want to put a pin on psychic horizons because I want you to be able to share with people sort of where your artist identity dipped into and traveled through the healing arts and like the psychic arts, because that's a really interesting facet of your story that I think our audience is really going to appreciate, and how you know these things about your pre-birth identity, right? And your commitment to your family, your contract with your family. But I just want to touch on this idea of identity for a moment, because identity has also been a really important part for me of my like understanding of myself, right? The stories that we tell, the origin stories, or the stories that we tell that shape sort of our concept of who we are, have so much to do with how we identify. And that can be both a really healthy and important and vital container, as well as something to break free from, you know? And so it's both those things on both extremes. Where do we want to go with this with you? Okay, so this is a question I had as you were talking. So, you know, what we discussed before was this idea that both of us have sort of similar childhood backgrounds in certain ways, but the way that we experience those childhood backgrounds were really, really divergent. And I'm always like super curious about like why that is, right? We both come from like fine artist families. We were both surrounded by artists at a young age. We were both only children up until the age of like 6 or 7. I got step siblings at that point. You got, you know, full blood siblings at that point. But those first formative, you know, pre-age of reason years, you know, those dream time years that form a person, we both had a lot of space and time to be alone and to create, right? Now, the difference is, you know, I'm curious about your identity as an artist and how easy that was for you to move into that space, and how much I sort of like pushed back on that as a child and didn't feel like it was my right to claim artist. And as you were talking, I was like, I wonder if it's different because my parents were like painters, and your father was a potter and your mom became a potter as well. If there's some sort of like cultural difference between like the fine art of painting, you know, and the functional art of like pottery, like art that you live with, art that you get to touch, right? Like the big thing in my home was like our walls were covered in paintings that I was not allowed to touch. Like they were like this austere sort of like, don't ever put your finger on the oil paintings, you'll ruin it sort of thing, you know? Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna turn that to you and just see if that, you know, the difference between form and function, or like high art versus like, you know, I can touch this art, I can feel this art, I can like drink from this art, sort of product versus process, I guess is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I mean, I guess all I can really speak to in terms of that is it's as you say. I mean, when you're a young child up to the age of 6, it's everything. It's such a subjective experience. And so all I can sort of speak to in terms of that is that thing one, yeah, I mean, I have memories of being like 5 in Colorado at CU, where my father was going through his grad school years, and being, I mean, you know, of course, I was 5 years old, so my experience of it was that I was like up at 2 in the morning at the pot shop, you know, at CU, while the students were firing a nighttime firing. And so there were like all of these, it was dark, and there were all of these people, and there was this fire-breathing dragon made out of bricks that was like spouting flame out of the sides when you pull the thing. I mean, I think, oh, it was just so immersive. It was so immersive for me. There was something about, yeah, the being around all of these adult people who were passionate and charged and inspired and really activated by what they were doing. And that, you know, that runs the gamut from, you know, being there for firings, to being at gallery openings, to being at dinner parties where I was sitting at the table with the adults, listening to them talk about stuff, and, you know, understanding some of it intellectually and not understanding other bits of it. But then, you know, it's true. It's like that, getting back to the whole identity piece. In a certain way, the journey of identity for me has been about redeeming inner reality with outer reality, you know. And as a small child, we take on, or we feel ourselves to be whatever it is that we feel ourselves to be. And then of course we take that nugget and we journey through life, and then we get bombarded with all kinds of messages about what that means to be whatever it is that we are. And we take some of that on, and we resist some of it, but it warps us, it shapes us and twists us one way or another. And you know, I personally feel like I have sort of come through a lot of that kind of journey to sort of arrive at that primordial or primal or indigenous identity of who I am and what I'm here for. And it's been a wonderful journey. And I'm not saying that I have arrived by any stretch of the imagination, but I do feel as though I have managed to go through a pretty good process of sort of examining all of the externals and all of the programs and all of the whatevs that have come in from the outside, and have just been able to be like, okay, well, this is useful, and I actually love this, and I'm going to keep this. And, oh yeah, that's not me, bye-bye. Or whatever, you know. So yeah, I think I might have spiraled off from your original question, but that's what I got to say about that.
No, I love that. I get this really funny image, you know, the word that comes up, of course, when you're talking about like picking up the different pieces and being like, okay, I love this or I don't love this. You know, the word is discernment, which of course for anyone on a spiritual journey, discernment is like the primary skill. That's the first skill you have to establish, right? Is to be able to tell what's yours and what's not yours, what you love and what you don't love. You know, the Marie Kondo, you know, KonMari method of like, does it bring you joy? Does it not bring you joy? Right? Those like discernment values, which actually our brain loves working in like these binaries. And this is where the binaries come in really helpful, right? It doesn't have to have a judgment attached to it. It's just like, is this mine or not mine? And that's one of the tools that I use for like empathic, you know, my empathic sort of abilities, making them manageable. You know, I learned a long time ago, if I'm sitting across from someone and we're having a session and all of a sudden I get this like really intense pain, instead of going, oh, I'm getting this really intense pain. What is it? What is it? Oh my God, is it not mine? You know, just saying, is that mine or not mine? And with total neutrality, and the moment that it lifts up because it's not mine, I go, oh, okay, I'm trying to learn from it. Then I bring it back in for a second and just feel it. And I'm like, okay, this is what they're feeling. Thank you. Now you can go, sort of feeling, and that way it doesn't stick, right? Because there's no fear attached to it. It's just like this neutral, like, oh, this is information. Information is good. Now you can go now because you're not mine. But the image I got, that was not related. The image I got when you were talking was like, oh, it's like, okay, when we come in, we just start magnetizing form to us, magnetizing stuff, whether it's form stuff or whether it's like identity stuff or whether it's beliefs and thoughts and value stuff, right? We start to accumulate. And it's almost as if like we go from like a tiny home to a bigger home, to a bigger home, to a bigger home, to a bigger home, because we just keep accumulating, right? And most of us as kids were not taught how to tidy or discern, right? And so at some point, it would behoove us to move into smaller spaces, right? Both physically and metaphorically, into smaller spaces where we had to like release more and more and more until we were able to get down to the pieces that mattered the most, right? That Martin Prachtel sort of idea of like house of origin that Beth, you've shared with me and has been such an inspiration over these years. But this idea that like we can live in really small spaces, the tiny home dream, if each thing in our home is intentionally placed and means something really important to us, right? And has energy that holds us, then we don't need 15 toaster ovens. We just need one little one that toasts one piece of toast because we only ever eat one piece of toast at a time or whatever it is, like to just really, really reduce. And I wonder, I know that you live in a pretty small space right now and your space is pretty intentional. I've always really admired how intentional the way you live and the intentional way that you seem to surround yourself with objects. It seems very rich internally. And so I just want to pass that back to you, this idea of like, do we keep accumulating and going to bigger spaces, or do we at some point start to like contract down and send more overboard than we had before?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess in a lot of ways, I feel like that's a really different thing for different people, because I think that there are lots and lots of people, lots and lots and lots of people. And I think that there's a piece of all of us, or a piece inside of all of us, where constriction is the norm and we don't think we have a right to expand. Mm-hmm. So I think for some people, expansion is really important, and I think for other people, coming back down to what's really, truly essential is really important. So I don't know about that. I guess, for me, and this kind of gets back to your previous question, a lot of the way that I live and my relationship to objects in particular is very, very informed by the house that I grew up in, where the creative focus, my father was making objects to be used, and so there was this automatic connection between the creative act and a sensual truth for these objects, right? And yeah, growing up in a house where there was a lot of art around, and my mom was it was the 70s, right? So it was like, oh, here's this great old chair we found out on the street. Mom's gonna macrame a new seat for it. Like, so just that. So and connecting to Martin Prachtel, I mean, his whole thing, of course, is that, well, not his whole thing, a tiny slice of some of his thing is that, when you live with handmade objects, whether you have made them yourself or the person who has made them, or if it even just carries the charge of whoever did make it, those objects just live in a completely different way, right, than something that came from Target. Or something that you ordered on Amazon, that you didn't even have to drive to the store to acquire, right? So, and so that's, I just, my habitat has always been one of things that have an aliveness and a resonance for me, because if they don't, I'm literally allergic to things that don't really function.
Yeah, in that enriching sort of way.
Yes.
Oh, what an interesting thing. One of the art forms that I got involved with in my mid-20s was glass blowing. And it was one of the things that I did. In some ways, it was to heal myself from my burn incident. I burned a third of my face off, and that was kind of an initiatory experience that got me onto my healing path. And being around hot things really scared me after that. But I always had a fascination with glass blowing. And so I took some classes, and I ended up doing a trade massage for glass blowing studio time and classes at this local studio in New York. And I just remember being so enthralled by like going to pick up my pieces from the kiln. It's a reverse kiln. So like with pottery, it's a kiln that builds up in temperature, and with glass blowing, it's a kiln that builds down. So you put it in extremely freaking hot, and then it cools it slowly so it doesn't explode. But I remember going to get like my pieces after they'd been in the kiln for a few days and just being like holding them in my hands. And they always felt much smaller than they had when they were burning hot and you couldn't get anywhere near them. They had such a big aura, right? When you're just like, oh my God, 2000 degrees, put it in. But when you get to like hold your own glass and drink out of your own glass and like be in relationship with that piece of like your breath and your effort and your collaboration. And it was very clear to me always that glass blowing is one of those things where you can't fool yourself. You are in collaboration with like an elemental, with fire, right? With fire and earth. Like you are not in control of the situation. And I was very happy to be, marginally talented at it, that I could do it and I could make functional pieces, but I was not like, my mind was not off. There was no automatic pilot of being like, oh yeah, I'm just like, I'm doing this thing. It was like, I am doing this thing and it's crazy and it's making something and it's not, is it going to explode or is it not going to explode? Is it going to make it, is it going to be birthed and be useful? And the way that immediately enhanced my life, then immediately like eating out of it or putting flowers in it or putting water in it, it was immediately enhanced my daily active living, which was so different than like a visual piece of art on the wall, which for me, art sings, like images sing, they sing songs. And so for me, visual art that's flat on the wall is both like a feast for my eyes and for my energetic ears. Like I hear and I feel that song. So it's not as if it doesn't benefit me, but the way I grew up, this is the kind of art, this is one of my parents' pieces. Like this is the kind of art I had experience with. I didn't have the kind of art that you put your hands inside of or that you put to your mouth or, and that's a very different kind of experience of art. And, the ensoulment of objects, right? So what you're talking about with Martine Prachtel is like all objects have soul, but some have more soul than others, or that soul's more awake than others. So that's very, very interesting. And I think it's something that most people don't have a lot of experience with. So, okay, this is another question. We are going to go back to that pin, the Psychic Horizons pin. It's still like glowing in the corner over here, but
good work tracking. I love it. Thank you. Thanks for doing that.
Installation over here. We're going to go back to that. But first, I want to talk about something I have ultimate questions about, as from one artist to another, and from a daughter of artists to someone who's, also a daughter of artists and been surrounded by artists. The question is production and dispersal, or production and deliverance. I don't know what the word is, but there is, when someone is a creative person, right, and is actively creating new life forms from their creative channel, they produce a lot more than they personally will ever need to use or hold or exist with. And the way that moves out into the world, and, I see paintings and all these pieces of art as being children, right? Like you give birth to your children and then you don't just hoard your children and say, you're never going to leave my house. You're going to be with me forever. You like hope that you raise them right. And then they go out and they live their own freaking lives. Right. So with art, it's sort of a similar thing, but I see so many artists living with such an overabundance, like a suffocating level of abundance. Like my parents have ripped up some of their paintings and like thrown them out. I've known artists that burn their paintings or throw them in dumpsters. I've thrown out art, you know, and it's like tragic because there's so many people, the vast majority of people who wouldn't consider themselves creatives or artists, who live without any real art, right? And so I have all these ideas in my head about how I want to like fix this issue. But I just want to talk to you just simply on like the micro level of like, as someone who's producing and birthing and giving life to new object, like what is your opinion on how that goes out into the world?
Well, that's, oh gosh, thanks for that, Riza, because that's a really big topic.
It's a really big topic, but I'm so eternally curious about it. I like this really huge imbalance in the world, right? Like I don't understand it.
Well, okay, but also I'm just gonna take a sharp right hand turn right now, because what you're getting at with that question resonates all the way to the core of what the hell we're doing here as humans. Because it's my conviction, it's my cellular truth that everything that comes out of my hands, everything that flows through me and comes out of my hands is this planet speaking, right? So it's the birthright of every human being on this planet to understand that and to act on that. Whether it's in the way you make your meals, whether it's in the way you decorate your house, whether it's the clothes you put on your body, the car that you drive, I don't care what human activity it is. You know, on some level or another, we are all the voice of the planet. And what has happened to art in the last however many thousand years it's been is to me simply indicative of the fact that we as humans have, this is my new shtick that I'm on, is that we humans have removed ourselves from the nutrient stream of the planet. Mm-hmm. And our own capacity to create beauty is a huge part of that nutrient stream. And we're just lifted right up off of it. You know, I remember the first time I truly, viscerally realized that I had sort of an unusual upbringing in terms of the amount of beautiful things that I lived with. And I was 23.
Wow.
And I was working home care. And I went into a couple's house. They had just had a baby. And the woman was some kind of professional. They were both professionals. And their insurance company covered some house cleaning. So I went into their house while they were gone. The parents were both back at work. The 3-month-old baby was in daycare. And I go in to clean this house, and I go into the kitchen, and every single solitary thing that they have to eat off of is made of plastic. And yes, I'm getting agitated as I talk about this.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and I was just, that's when it hit me. Like, I had understood that conceptually for a very, very long time up to that point. But just that whole house spoke to so much that was utterly heartbreaking to me, right? So there's that. And then there's just me making my stuff. And I'm, you know, this is a question that I am continually sort of dancing with, right? I'm very interested in alternate economies. You know, I think this whole sort of, I'm going to trade these pieces of paper or this conceptual currency for this whatever it happens to be, this piece of food or this piece of art or this piece of time or whatever. You know, I mean, okay, fine, we've created this, but you know, I'm pretty excited because I'm going to send some of my art children out into the world this year, because I'm trading someone I know for vegetables. Like, they're going to get some art and I'm going to get some produce this summer. You know, I'm trading art for body work. You know, and of course, I'm also trying to sell my art for conceptual currency and all of that stuff, but I'm really opening up to other ways to make that exchange. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm very interested and excited to see sort of where that leads, just within my own sort of, just within my village, just within my own village. Mm-hmm. And also, I can also say that in a certain kind of way, I don't feel that it's that tragic that people burn their work. And if at some point I need to burn it, I will too. But I think about nature, and I think about the utter extravagance with which nature creates. You know, I just looked it up this week. Each dandelion makes 40 to 100 seeds.
Wow.
And if you think about each of those seeds, how many of those seeds are actually going to wind up making another dandelion? Like, you have to just...
Yeah. Wild abandon.
Wild abandon. Mm-hmm. And if things wind up getting burned or returned to the earth in some way, that's okay. That's actually being part of the nutrient stream. Mm-hmm. And so to hold this art as something so precious, mm-hmm. that it's above that, mm-hmm. that's indicative of sort of the airless atmosphere that we've created for fine art anyway. So, and like, don't get me started on the whole fine art thing.
Yeah, the whole the best art, you know, what we determine to be the best art getting like bought by investors, so it can be hermetically sealed into a
yes.
book, so it can be an investment upon that artist's death.
That
yeah, it's fucked up.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think it's very interesting. I think so when we talk about like the balance, right? Like, either something's precious or it's garbage, right? Like, that's our sort of, you know, precious, like I'm going to hoard it and hold on to it forever and to like crush its little bones, or the other side of that, which is like, this is completely like disposable garbage, like repulsive sort of energy.
Yeah.
And sometimes I dance this dance with my husband, because my husband has, like, when he gets really overwhelmed, he sees stuff, like stuff becomes like the 4-letter swear word, even though it's 5 letters. The 5-letter swear word in our house, it's like the stuff is taking over. Like, he sees physical objects, and some sort of Japanese like austerity like gets like awoken in him, and he's just like, like, oh, stuff, you know. And I grew up in a family of beautiful hoarders. Like, my parents hold on to things very much. I wouldn't say they're hoarders that deserve to be on a show of their own, but they really, like, things are very precious, right? Stuff is very precious. And so I'm trying to walk this line of like, I want balance. I want to be able to like hold something and be like, this is beautiful and precious, and it's a creation. Someone made this with their hands and I love it, but I don't own it. It's not mine, right? Like, it is its own living being. It has its own soul, and it came to me and it has been with me for a number of years. But if it's time for it to go, if it's time for it to break, if it's time for it to be somebody else's friend, like, that will happen, and that's okay. Right? I feel good about that. And doing glass art for as long as I did, I had to get really fucking good with that, because almost every piece I've made has broken at this point. Like, I have like 1 or 2 pieces left. Like, almost everything has broken, because it's glass, you know? And so you have to be okay with it. Like, that was its lifetime, right? And so I think what we're talking about too is this idea of like permanence and impermanence. And I think that if I could pinpoint one thing that's lifted us off the nutrient stream of this planet, I would say it's our fundamental fear of impermanence. that somehow we don't feel good. Oh, we're still recording, but Beth is gone. Okay, well, I'm going to finish this stream of thought, and hopefully she will come back on. But basically, we have lifted up off of the nutrient stream, as Beth was saying, and part of that is because of our fear of impermanence. We're fearful that we are going to die, that our children are going to die, that the things that we create are no longer going to exist. Hello, Beth. I just kept talking. I saw that you froze, and I was like, oh, I'm still recording, so I'm just going to keep recording.
Good.
So hopefully that's going to be okay for our recording. But what I was saying basically is that, the thing that I can pinpoint as being, as lifting us off of that nutrient stream of the planet, as you were saying, is our fear of impermanence, which is, basic level primal fear that we're going to die, that our children are going to die, that the things that we create are not going to last, right? And that when we do that, we move into an unnatural zone with nature, right? If that's a little bit repetitive, but this idea that nature has a natural cycle of exuberant, ridiculous, opulent creation that dies, right? And like you were saying with the dandelion seeds, like 100 seeds may be released by one dandelion head, and maybe only 10% of those will become new plants. We don't know, right? And so we produce and we allow things to go into a natural cycle, and that's okay. And so I think that when I've gotten really like up in arms in the past about my parents, like, destroying their artwork, or other artists I know, like burning paintings and stuff like that, it's more coming from a place of like that fine art sort of place, right? Where like someone said this, someone did not say this was fine art, so therefore it's not. And this is my interpretation. This is not what my parents have said to me overtly or any other artist, but like, because no one has claimed this as fine art that they want to pay money for in their homes, therefore it's garbage and therefore it gets destroyed, right? And it's like, oh my God, but A, it's not garbage. B, it's precious. C, it never got to live a life. D, no one ever got to enjoy it. And 95% of the people living in this country have no real art in their home. Like,
that's it.
At most they have a poster of Monet, right? Yes. Like they have no, there's no living art in people's homes or in people's kitchens. People are eating off of paper plates because it's easier than washing dishes. Like, people don't have art singing in their homes.
Yes.
And singing them to life and returning them to the earth, right? Yeah. And I think it's, it's the creation of plastic. It's our quest for immortality, our quest for longer lives. Like, we are so afraid of the natural cycle of expression and decomposition, right? And that has to happen. That's the way the earth functions. It's the way we function as branches of the earth. Like, this is naturally how it's supposed to go. There's just a huge inequity and that identity, or that idea of worth being placed on things for these arbitrary fucking reasons, right? Of like some person with money said that this was art, and someone believed them. And so now it's art, but all this other art is not really art yet, is it's hard.
Yeah. And I absolutely, I completely agree with you that, and I'm familiar with your ambition to sort of level, well, to, there's all this beautiful stuff that's being made. And if one is, has really bought into that program, then giving it away or trying to bring it to people who don't have access, because it's an equity thing too, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, people can't afford,
right,
to buy handmade things. So how do you get the handmade things to, how do you get art to the people? Bread and Puppet Theater has this whole cheap art manifesto, like, bread and puppet. It's art is bread. That level of creative expression and human endeavor is an absolutely fundamental reason that we're here. That's why the earth made us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. We are the channel through which she expresses something very unique.
Yeah.
You know? I think that, so there's this equity question of accessibility, right?
Yes.
Accessibility. And for all of us who are doing creative endeavors, and I would say that, spiritual or healing work and all this is also a creative endeavor. And there's this weird thing where it's like, I want my services or I want my art to be available to all who wish to receive it, but also I need to make a living and I need to be compensated. There needs to be reciprocity, right? That's also the way that nature works. There is reciprocity. Like every cycle has to feed into another cycle, right? So, an artist can't continue to produce if an artist isn't receiving anything for what they produce. And if what they produce isn't moving out into feeding another cycle, right? Like if that's not happening, then the engine can't keep running, right? So of course we also, like if we're talking about this conceptual currency, we live in a place in which currency is very non-equitable, right? We have people with way more resources financially than they ever will know what to do with, and a massive amount of people with like just not enough, right? And then we have these like very weird ways of using the funds that we do have, right? Amazon is a great example. How many people, including us, are buying stuff off Amazon that they don't actually need, right? But they feel they need to like reinforce a life that feels filled with lack. And it's really the most affordable way to do it. But really, I go into a home with like 50 dishes. Like, do you need 50 dishes for 2 people? Like maybe you only need like 1 for each person, right? And like a handful for guests. I don't know. So it is also a value system or like just a culture around mass-produced, practically soulless stuff, that can become unsold if you attach enough feeling to it. But, it's just this like mass-produced food, mass-produced material, right? I'm sure there was a place I was going with that. I see you have run into like my kayak has come up against like the side of like, oh, it's a little dry over here. I kind of bottomed out. I hear like the stones scraping the bottom of the kayak. I could go on for ages about like my personal opinions about all this. Someday you guys will know that I will hopefully make an organization, but even for my own services, I'm looking for like creating scholarships fund, because the thing is that the art still needs to be validated, right? And this conceptual currency is one of the ways we validate art, but also the way that we afford to have artists still producing art, right? They have to be able to make a living. They have to be able to make their own bread and butter out of this work and be compensated fairly for it. So, and we do put value on those monetary values. So I don't know, there's a way of evening out the playing field, and hopefully it'll end up being something where people have all the access to the art and the healing and the tools and the learning that they want, because we should. And in the meantime, I love the way that you're getting involved in your local trade economy, because I know for myself, when I was doing like body work, I lived large, right? And you got to see that. Like I traded with the cafe owners, like I traded with the pet food store person, I traded for all sorts of services. I always had fantastic color in my hair and enough food to eat and all these kind of things, just because I traded my services for services, and everyone wins in that situation. So we can live very rich lives with each other if we're willing to be creative about the way that we move our talents and our energy and our time around, right? Yeah. And then of course there's those things that you can't trade with the mortgage company for, for healing arts or for paintings or pottery. Not quite yet. Not yet. Dear Chase Bank, I have a really awesome casserole dish. You might would you please deduct it from my monthly mortgage? We're not quite there yet, but I hope someday. Yeah, these essentials like food and art and education will all be something that has a very creative way of compensating itself. So now my little blinking light is saying, okay, now it's time to talk about Psychic Horizons. So let's talk about your move from theater into your work with psychic healing work and what that journey was like. Very few of us in this community of transformative work have actually had really formal training where we've gone to like a school like you went to in Colorado. So I'd love to hear more about that experience and about how that has informed your identity and work as an artist?
Well, so just, you know, like to hit the points in the narrative. I went to acting school in North Carolina in college, undergrad. And while I was there, I met a band of gypsies who I had known, not literally, who I had known for many lifetimes. These were all people who came in with me in my freshman class. And long story short, we wound up forming a theater company together. And we were making theater together for 8 years after school. And we were making all original work. And that was great. And then the company blew up, as companies will sometimes do. And I wound up back in Colorado going to psychic school. Because that's what you do. Because that's what you do when your theater company blows up. And you know, I guess I will just try to keep it somewhat pithy in terms of that, switching horses like that. Thing one, going through that training was when I started to really actively peel off a lot, go into that discernment place that we talked about earlier, of being like, oh God, I've got all of these external constructs that are really active in my mind and in my field around who I am, what's possible, what I'm here for, blah, 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 blah. So that was extremely exciting and very, very life-changing. I, during that time, kind of disowned my artist self. I was like, I'm not an artist anymore. I'm a healer, right? And while at the same time being very aware that, like, when I was doing a psychic reading for someone, it was palpably true that the information and the way that I was connecting spirit to spirit with this person was arising from exactly the same well that my really good nights on stage welled up from, right? So no real difference here, just a difference in form. And so I really I really embraced that healer identity for over 10 years. And, you know, interestingly enough, and I loved how when you were sort of doing your big thing there, you know, it was very clear to me that you were saying art and artist, but really the implication was healers and healing as well. Mm-hmm. Like, it's all in the same sphere. Mm-hmm. For realsies. Like, very, very, very little differentiation between those things for me personally, and I think for you also. So I was struggling and playing the same reindeer games in terms of, okay, well, I have this skill and I know that it's helpful, and I'm really passionate about wanting to share it, and how do I do that? And how much do I charge? And how do I try to educate people as to why this actually is meaningful and what this can do for them? And what is it really? And all that stuff, right? And then, you know, my path was that at a certain point, I got a really clear message from my counsel. It's time for you to stop doing healing work. And that freaked me out badly. And I tried bargaining. I was like, well, what if I just take a few months off? They were like, no, actually, you need to stop. Like, you need to stop. Mm-hmm. And I went through a year of just being, and this gets back to that identity piece, because I did. I knew that I had to follow the instructions. Like, I knew it. I didn't want to believe it and I didn't like it, but I knew that I had to follow the instructions. So I did, which meant that I went through a long period of time for me where I wasn't creating anything. I was just like, I had laid down my healer identity and I had not yet picked up my artist identity. And it was a hard year. It was really shattering. I didn't know who the hell I was. I didn't know what my value was. Yeah. So that was a trip. That was a trip. And then, and then coming back around to, oh, I actually have unfinished business in the art world. But then, the really interesting thing of when it came time for me to start creating again and knowing that it was time, realizing for myself that I didn't know what it meant to create without any reference to any external force. I didn't know what it was to only refer to myself. And ultimately, so basically what I did was I took a vow to myself that I was going to paint for a year and I wasn't going to tell anybody about it, which for me is really hard. Because I'm always like, look what I did, and look what I did, and look what I did, That was a hard vow to take, but I took it and I did it. And I got down to some kind of core during that time. And ultimately, what I understood about the sort of directive around it's time for you to stop doing healing work is that my guides knew that there was a lot of external compulsion embedded in my healing work. There was a lot of just unconsciousness and compulsion around it. And it was gumming up the works. Just like if I set out to make a painting and I'm busy thinking about okay, what kind of colors was I seeing on Instagram today? And how many likes did that painting get? And maybe I should try, or even just, I'm going to set out to try to make something that people are going to want. That's not it.
Yeah.
For me, that's not it.
Well, it's interesting. The two words that come to mind around art and why healing art and teaching and painting and making pottery and, acting and doing theater, all these things are the same thing, because it comes down to two words: connection and expression, right? It's connecting to something beyond the here and now, maybe, or beyond the veil, something deeper, within us or around us. It's connecting to that, and then it's finding a way to express that, right? And I think that when you're doing it within the context of healing, with certain techniques, or within the context of theater, with a company, or you're doing it in these different contexts, you have a container that already is constricting you and allows for that creativity to bloom, right? It creates that tight uterus that allows the baby to form into baby form, right? But when you have no context, when your context is blown, right, and you're in this ethereal place of what the fuck do I create, and why do I create it, and what am I connecting to, and how am I going to express it? That becomes a much more confusing and a deeper question, really, right? And so I think that that's really interesting. I think that that's a really interesting journey. And I remember saying to you when I left Portland, and this just pops up, is that, when your guidance told you to stop healing, I was there, we were friends at that time. And I remember being aghast, just being what do you mean? But you can't, but that, what, and I was so worried about you and worried about, it was such a strong identity that not only you held for yourself, but we held for you. And I'd met you when you were already a healing artist and a teacher. And so one of the things I said to you when I left Portland was like, the thing that I know that reassures me about you as a person and our friendship, but really you as a person on this planet, is that you will always be true to you, whatever that is, right? Whether it's that year of secret painting and losing your shit and being like, I don't know who I am or what I'm worth, right? Or whether it's the you that we see now or the you that we saw then, it doesn't matter, because it's all a very personal, real, authentic journey. And that gives me a lot of inspiration and a lot of happiness in my heart. And it means that I always know who I'm reaching out to as a person, right? Because you are always fundamentally you. And that is a really, I mean, that's kind of a rare thing, I think, in this day and age, because so many people are thinking about how they're being viewed, right? And so that does gunk up the works. I think that's a really good, analogy. I was speaking to one of our other speakers, and we were talking about this world of doing live videos and how weird it is. And I said, the thing is that I just watched myself now on camera so many times that I'm not often thinking about how I'm going to be perceived, or like if I flub up a word, or like if my hair's weird or whatever. Like, I'm not often thinking about that, because if I do, it takes me out of my stream. And my stream is where things come from. My stream is a connection from beyond myself, right? I'm connected with the spirits that I bring in. I'm connected with my counsel, my higher self. That's where this is coming from. I don't take ownership over it. I just let it kind of roll. And I know that my ability to make words is like one of my expressive forms. I mean, fundamentally. But if I were to stand aside and be like, oh, how does that color look on you today? Or how are people going to perceive you? Or is this Instagram worthy? Or whatever the fuck sort of things we're weighing these days, it would make my stream janky, right? And so I think the same is true with our art expression. And one example came up that I want to mention, because I think you'll find this funny. So my mom, for years and years and years, my mom has always done abstract art since I was a kid. And she, for years and years and years, like 20 years, painted these paintings that were like these vertical lines. They were sort of like aurora borealises. They're huge, right? 8 by 10 foot, 6 by 8 foot, like these big environments, really. And she would talk about them as like spaces that she needed to be held by, right? But they were these sort of astral plane spaces. They didn't have, or even beyond astral plane, really, they didn't have form in them. They just had color and light and layer, and they would take her like a year to do one painting. She'd maybe do a couple at the same time, but like they're huge, and they're all these like tiny little lines, like just these series of lines, right? Almost like infinite stringed instruments that you're just like walking into, right? And she'd been showing these at galleries, and a lot of people loved them, but she wasn't selling a whole lot of them. And, she was feeling, there was this constant, what I perceived to be this balance between this work she was doing that was really important, and that came from a fine art background, right? From a highly educated, like masterful place, very intentional place, but they weren't being received in the way that they needed to be received for her to feel good and feel worth for what she was doing. And then one day I came home for like Christmas or something, and there was a branch like coming out of the corner of one of her paintings on top of one of these aurora borealises, right? Just like one lonely branch. And I was like, what is that? What is this branch? And my mom was like, I don't know. I felt like putting a branch there. And I was like, oh, this is good. This is like evolution. I'm seeing evolution happen right here, right? And then the next year I came back, and there was a little tiny animal. Like, I mean, think about these huge, like 8 foot by 10 foot or 6 by 8 foot, just like giant paintings. My mom's like 5'1", right? So she's painting on a ladder, these like giant paintings. And then there's like a tiger, like this big, just like afloat, like somewhere in the painting. And my mom's animals, clearly my mom did all the animals, and my stepfather did the background of this and the tree, I think. But my mom's animals are like so shockingly lifelike, right? So this shockingly lifelike miniature little tiger in the painting. And I just remember like being like kind of scandalized. Like, this is no longer like something that you would see in a gallery necessarily. Like, is not what you expected from the hoity-toity, like modern art, like Chicago galleries, right? There's like an animal, like just floating in the middle of this painting. But what it did was, it was like her claiming the paintings as her own. Like, they were what she needed to express.
Yeah.
Those were animals that she needed to protect her or bring her wisdom. right? And so suddenly it was her like taking the paintings back and being like, no, I'm not going to like Photoshop you so that you look presentable to the world. I'm going to let you be truly yourself and express what's really inside of you. And what it did also is gave the paintings context, right? Then you understood the vastness of these landscapes that she was creating because there was a figure in it to relate to, right? So very interesting evolution between like the process of creating and what that does for the creator, what that does for the vehicle of that voice, of that expression, and also the product, you know, and the product's willingness to just be a true expression and be its own being and live in the world. And that if we're going to truly love and honor our creations, and I speak from a mother of physical children as well, we have to like be willing to understand that they have a life that is their own, an expression that is their own. They will have a death and a timeline that is their own. And they will get hurt along the way. They will have many experiences along the way, and that's not ours to determine. It's theirs to determine. So that's a precious and beautiful thing about creation and about being that vehicle, right? Not being like, I am creating you, but I'm like letting you move through me. I'm using my body, my life to let you move through me.
Yeah.
So I got a little verklempt there because I'm pregnant. It's like even more. But anyway, I want to talk about inspiration, which is where when we did our opening meditation and I was kind of asking Spirit for some advice, they were creating this whole image for me. And the thing that we wanted to get to at the very, very end, because I think this is so important, and especially on the tail end of you saying like, okay, you moved into this place where you put all these different contexts down. And I think part of the growth process that you've discussed and we've discussed many times in this conversation alone is like the importance of having an identity and then allowing it to shatter into 1,000 pieces and going through that state of complete groundlessness and not knowing, right? Like who you are, where you are, what you're worth, what you're expressing, and then letting it sort of like piece itself into something again. So now you're in this place, fast forward to 2019, Jesus Christ, 2019, here we are. And Beth is producing a ton of beautiful visual art that I love seeing out in the social media world and in person. And it just makes me wonder, you're so prolific and you're so dedicated to creating. What is it? How do you connect with your sense of inspiration? Where do you create from?
I think that's what that year of secret painting did for me, was when I stripped away the reference to what's my father going to think of this, or, you know, what, or yeah, anyway, we'll keep it simple because I know we're coming down to the end. So stripping all of that off and learning to simply create for my own joy, fully knowing that when I create in my own joy, I'm doing exactly what I'm here to do, and that's my gift. Mm-hmm. For some reason, that really hooked me into that dandelion making. and you know, the other thing too is that I am fortunate in that I'm very compelled by a lot of different mediums. I perform, I make films, I make animations, I paint, I dance. So all of those things go through their own cycles. And so they're not all running red hot all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, one will come forward and one will go back into the background. And I also think there's just something really lovely about coming into one's 50s and having been through enough in life to really, really get a sense of just absolute clarity of like, this is what I'm here for. Mm-hmm. this is it. After all of this noodling around, and after all of this throwing my dandelion seeds all over the place and having them land in water or on concrete or in the gravel or up in a bush somewhere, like, oh yeah, this is what I'm here for. So I'm going to be much more intentional, and I'm going to take more care with this gift.
Yeah. Oh, it's so beautiful. I just see this like the star that we're aiming for, right? Is just labeled joy. This star of inspiration is labeled joy. And that's like this North Star, this sort of guiding place, is to always reference back to what produces like visceral, heartfelt, eternal joy in the process. Like you have all these videos of you peeling the painter's tape like off the art and just like revealing what's underneath, and just like that the lusciousness of that, right? Like you can feel it even as the viewer and just be like, oh yes, peel it off, like I want to see what does it look like underneath, just that feeling of joy. And I think that also, what you mentioned, this feeling of purpose, right? The word that came up was refinement for me, that getting older and getting to this place of refinement where you have a really like grounded place in yourself where you know that what you're doing is your purpose, right? And it's not it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what you're physically producing, but how you go about the living and the producing of it, right? The expression of it, that feeling really grounded in like what it is that you're like navigating towards is purpose. And that so many of us in this day and age are like constantly overwhelmed by whether or not we're living our purpose, whether or not we're doing enough, right? I love the term, like it matters more who you be than what you do.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really, really true. Like these are subjects that I could noodle on, using your word. I could noodle on that forever. We are at our time. And so I want to be mindful of that. And you are one of our departure points. So this Stories of Awakening has like grounded itself enough that it's begun to like sprout extra limbs. And I'm seeing people sort of depart in different ways from like the original structure, which I think is fantastic. That means this is a living being. And you came up with a really great idea about your offer to the community and having that be about conversations, like real conversations. So I want to give you just like a minute to sort of drop that penny in the bucket so that people can see your face. It'll be written down in the blog as well, but I want to give people the opportunity.
Yeah, it's very, very simple. And that is just that if you feel compelled, if you feel so moved, get in touch with me. I will have my Instagram feed and my website address on the website where this video will be available. And if you would like to go take a look at what I'm up to, and if you feel drawn to, if you feel like you would like to have a little piece of artwork next to your kitchen sink to keep you company while you wash dishes or whatever, just get in touch with me. No one will be turned away for lack of funds. I've got a huge variety of different things, and we can connect and see what you would like and what I can provide, and we'll figure it out.
I love that. And that all that information will also be on our YouTube channel, where we'll also be cross-posting this, just in case you're watching this some nebulous time in the future. Is there a timeline on that offer? Or like a forever offer?
I think that's a forever offer. Just tell me Riza sent you.
Awesome. I love this is you're my hero, because this is, you're my hero in more ways than we can mention on this video. But also for just like taking that call forward into saying that every human should be living with art. And every human that wants to live with art should live with art, and let's figure out a way to make that happen. Like, that makes me so eternally happy. So thank you for coming up with a creatively expressive and connective way to make an offering to the community. And I hope that people take you up on it. I've got several of your pieces in the house, and they make me happy every single day. So
I'm so glad.
They do. They sing to me and I sing right back to them, and we do a little dance. Yeah. So thank you, Beth. I love you so much. Thank you for sharing your time and energy, the most precious, precious gift you could give, and your wonderful story. And thank you all for watching, and continue to, come onto this website, fullawakening.net, and our YouTube channel, and come visit us each month on the 15th. We'll have a new story of awakening that is something that brings me personal joy. So it's something I'm going to keep doing. And I hope that it fills your life with a little bit of inspiration. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.